Welcome to the IAEE online conference, and welcome to the second day of this conference. We're happy to have you for this session, concurrent session number 78 on blackouts. Such an important topic. It's timely. We just saw one of the blackouts that happened in Texas that led to major problems for a developed power system. And obviously, this is security of supply of electricity is over energy in general is one of the most important topics for any decision maker and policy maker and economist when we're taking decisions. So I introduce myself quickly. So I am Abdin. I am a researcher at CentraleSupelec. I did my PhD on risk and resilience of complex engineering systems, focusing on electricity systems with a big professor in risk and resilience assessment. He's called Enrico Zio. And then I did a postdoc on risk and resilience of power systems and another one on planning electric power systems. So I'm going to be your chair today, and I'm very happy to have you. I don't want to take more time from the first presentation. So Pierre already set the instructions for how we're going to proceed. So everyone is going to have 20 minutes to present their work, and then we're going to have 10 minutes of questions and answers. So we can start without any delays, and I would be happy to introduce the first presenter, Ms. Alessandra Motz, who's going to present. So she's going to present her paper titled "Electricity Blackouts for Business Consumers: Perceived Impacts, Heterogeneous Responses, and the Role of Cognitive Drivers." Just the words. Alessandra is a postdoc researcher at the Institute for Economic Research of the Università della Svizzera, Italiana, and she's also the project management for the energy branch of the university. So happy to have you, and looking forward to listening to your presentation.
Thank you, Adam, and good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I'm really happy of having the chance of discussing this research that was the last chapter of my PhD thesis. So I will share my screen and start the discussion. Just a second. Okay. Oops. I hope you see my presentation, right? Okay. Okay. So this presentation deals with a study using stated preferences that we conducted 2 years ago. We started 2 years ago to investigate the impact of blackouts on business electricity consumers in Canton Ticino, which is the region of Switzerland where my university is located, in the south of Switzerland. Okay, and the focus is on the perception of business consumers, so the perceived costs, impacts, the possible reactions, and also the factors that can drive different reactions among these consumers. So, as you probably know, energy security is a really important topic in general, but it has become even more important with the energy transition that has brought about several challenges for the security of electricity supplies, with a deep restructuring of the electricity system. The first steps to ensure security of electricity supplies that were adopted along with the beginning of the energy transition in Europe were mainly based on a supply side approach. So several countries introduced some capacity payment mechanisms to protect the profitability of programmable power plants that were less profitable due to the changing structure of the electricity systems, but that were still needed for security reasons. However, these mechanisms with time, they started to show their limitations, so that several researchers and institutions, among which also the European Commission, called for a consumer-centric approach to security. This basically means that they suggested that the value that consumers put on security should be taken into account in market design and also in the planning of new investments. The value that consumers place on security is also increasingly important if we think that with the new technological developments, electricity suppliers are increasingly able to provide customized supply, security levels to different consumption segments. But then this leads us to the question, what is actually the value that different consumers place on security? Within this analysis, I focus on the business segment. And as I said, I study the value of security for business consumers located in Ticino in Switzerland. So the objective of this study was understanding the magnitude of damages caused by blackouts, the kind of damage that blackouts actually cause to firms, the adoption of precautionary measures such as backup system as UPS or generators, but also insurances for blackout damage, and then also the impact of blackout timing on the firm's perceived damage. Then I also try to investigate the preferences of business consumers with respect to different characteristics of the blackouts, such as duration, availability of advanced blackout notice, and also the availability and magnitude of the compensation provided by the electricity supplier for the blackout inconvenience. And within this, let's say, chapter of my analysis, I investigated a bit deeper the heterogeneity in consumer behavior, and more specifically, I tried to disentangle taste heterogeneity from heterogeneity due to the way businesses or respondents in my survey make decisions concerning blackouts and possible reactions to blackouts. So there is indeed a vast literature concerning the value of security of supplies for the business consumers. There are mainly three methods that are used. The first group of methods belongs to use survey data, such as discrete choice experiments, contingent evaluation, analysis, or direct worth studies. Then there is another branch of the literature that uses the so-called production function approach. In this case, the researchers use macroeconomic data, more specifically, the contribution to GDP of each industrial segment and the electricity consumption of the same segments, and compute the value of each unit of electricity that was missing, that was not supplied, in terms of ratio between GDP and electricity consumption. So the value of security equates the contribution, the value of the GDP that would be produced on average using each kilowatt hour. Finally, there is a third group of studies that use panel data analysis. These kind of studies usually focus on countries where blackouts are rather common, and estimate the value of security in terms of lost productivity or lost turnover due to the occurrence of blackouts. In general, the literature concerning the value of security for the business segment yields very scattered estimates concerning the value of the cost of blackouts or the value of security. The estimates diverge radically across sectors and across countries, and also depending on the method that was used. And it is really difficult to understand what are the drivers of this variability. Generally speaking, usually longer blackouts harm more frequent blackouts harm more, and receiving advance notice helps reducing blackout damage. The possibility of substituting electricity as an input for production also lowers blackout damage, but then there is uncertainty as of the role of backup equipment, blackout timing, and also the economic sector or firm size and other variables that are included in fewer analyses. So my analysis was based on an original online survey that I developed and distributed via email to a panel of around 3,000 business consumers located in Ticino between the end of 2018 and the beginning of 2019. The survey included questions concerning the typical demographic variables that can be used for describing firms, such as the number of employees, the average yearly consumption of electricity, the sector, the location, and so on. Then there were questions concerning the perceived impact of a blackout and also the adoption of precautionary measures such as backup devices and insurances. And then there was a discrete choice experiment. I will just quickly skip to the next slide to show you how the discrete choice experiment looked like. So basically the respondents were asked to imagine that they had to face a blackout. Their company had to face a blackout happening when blackouts harm more for their production activity. That is, for example, in winter, on weekdays, and during working hours, let's say, depending on the sector and firm. And they had to choose one out of two blackout scenarios here that were different in terms of blackout duration, availability of advance notice, and compensation provided by the electricity supplier. Each respondent was facing 6 choices like this. So here you see the so-called attributes of each blackout, the possible attributes of each blackout scenario. So blackout duration could vary between 0, so no blackout, and 12 hours. The compensation for blackout inconvenience was varying between 0 and 25% of the monthly electricity bill of the company. And then advance notice was, of course, yes, no, so a dummy variable. I collected 543 valid responses, and the sample is reasonably representative in terms of sector and firm size of the economy of Canton Ticino. So the method I use for the analysis is like, I started from the typical formulation of discrete choice model. Basically, the assumption of this kind of models is that the respondent, in comparing the 2 or more alternatives, will select the one that provides him with the highest indirect utility, depending on the characteristics of the alternative and, if relevant, also of the respondent. As I am dealing with firms, I had to translate this problem in terms of profit maximization. So basically, the assumption is that the respondents will choose the alternative that maximizes their profit, which is exogenous, but is diminished by the cost caused by a blackout. And the profit is influenced by the characteristics of the blackout and the characteristics of the respondents. I estimated this model in 2 specifications. First, a simple multinomial logit specification, then a random parameter specification, where basically the parameters for the characteristics of the blackouts were allowed to vary according to a normal distribution, of which I estimated both the mean and the standard deviation. Before jumping into the results and the estimation, I noticed that I had a problem with my responses. More specifically, almost 40% of the respondents always chose the alternative with the shortest blackout duration. This behavior contradicts the assumption of discrete choice modeling that implied that each respondent should consider at the same time all the attributes of the available alternatives. In this case, I can talk about lexicographic preferences. So it seems that some respondents first look at the blackout duration and then consider the other attributes. So the question is, how can I interpret these lexicographic preferences? Is this something that reveals that the respondents place an extremely high importance on blackout duration and are not willing to trade, for example, a longer blackout for a higher compensation? Or is this a sign of heuristic decision-making, meaning that the respondents, when completing the discrete choice experiment, were a bit tired of the survey? Maybe they just wanted to simplify their reasoning, and so they just decided to only look at the blackout duration, and they decided to neglect the other attributes. And how can I identify this decision rule and include it into my discrete choice model? Luckily, I had some good suggestions from the literature. So this is how I proceeded. First, I estimated a simple probit model for the probability of answering lexicographically. So always choosing the alternative with the shortest blackout duration. The explanatory power is rather low, but at least this model gives me some ideas as regards the connection between lexicographic preferences and the characteristics of the respondents. And I see, most interestingly, that those respondents who had at least one blackout in the past 6 months are less likely to answer lexicographically. And those who have at least one backup device are more likely to answer lexicographically. Then this is the results, this table collects the results of the my best specifications for the discrete choice model. As you see, I estimated two multinomial logi specification and two random parameter specifications. And this two multinomial logi specification and also in turn the two random parameter specifications are identical. But in the second specification, so in the first, I included the whole sample, and in the second one, I excluded the respondents that answered lexicographically. This was a suggestion that I took from the literature in discrete choice modeling. Looking at the random parameter specification, which is my preferred one, I see that the random parameter model measures much smaller heterogeneity in the responses of the participants if I exclude the lexicographic respondents. And also, interestingly, the beta for the compensation parameter is negative if I consider the whole sample, which is quite unexpected because I expect if I give a compensation, this is something positive, and it turns positive, although very small, if I exclude the lexicographic respondents. I conclude that a large share of the very large heterogeneity that is estimated in my random parameter model on the whole sample is actually due to heuristic decision making. And I decide to exclude the lexicographic respondents and retain the final model 4, so only on the non-lexicographic respondents as my final specification. Basically, this means that I assume that the true preferences of the respondents are only expressed by respondents, and the other part of the sample just answered lexicographically out of boredom, fatigue, but not revealing their true preferences with respect to blackouts. So what I see is that blackout damage increases with the log of duration, suggesting that every additional minute of blackout has a negative impact in terms of cost, but the marginal impact is decreasing with blackout length. I see that compensation slightly mitigates blackout damage, but there is a substantial variability in this respect. And advanced notice contributes to decreasing the impact of a blackout, and there is some variability, but in terms of magnitude, it is less pronounced than what we see for compensation. Moreover, firms with previous blackout experience evaluate compensation more positively, and firms with a backup connection to the distribution line, which is one of the available backup options, are less affected by a longer blackout duration. So other findings, just summarized here in a slide without detailed tables. So other findings from my survey, I discovered that more than half of the firms have at least one backup device, UPS or generator or both, and some of them also have an additional connection to the distribution line. Around 1/3 are also insured against selected kinds of blackout damage, more specifically ICT damage, loss of data, damage to machinery, or damage to the buildings. If there is a 1 hour-long blackout, there is some of the production activities can go on. The percentage is a bit less than 40% if the blackout is not announced, and a bit less than 50% if the blackout is announced at least 1 day in advance. The magnitude of a blackout damage for a blackout lasting 1 hour is between 500 francs, or more or less 500 euros or dollars, and 1,000 francs if the blackout is not announced, and between 0 and 500 francs if the blackout is announced. So this value may seem relatively small, but you have to consider that most of the firms located in Ticino are small, so below 15 employees, and but they are many. So if you multiply this value for the number of firms that are located in the region, probably the final impact of a blackout is quite substantial. Moreover, blackout damage increases with electricity consumption and is around 10 to 20% of the yearly electricity bill for firms with relatively low electricity bills, and a bit less than 10% of the yearly bill for firms with large consumptions. The heaviest blackout consequences are in terms of cost of labor, damages to ICTs, lost turnover, and damaged machinery. So to sum up and conclude, I evaluate the preferences of business consumers towards blackout duration, availability of advance notice, and blackout compensation. And I find a substantial variability of individual reactions. And I think this could partially explain why also different studies, also for the same regions, often lead to different estimates. This variability can be connected both to taste heterogeneity and to heuristic decision-making. I also provide some insight into the perceived impacts of blackout and the coping strategies that are adopted by business consumers in Canton Ticino. Regarding plans for future studies, options could be to investigate also preferences for other blackout characteristics such as the uncertainty in blackout duration, also preferences for demand response options or customized security levels. And finally, what I personally find really interesting would be to investigate how we can incorporate the different ways in which firms decide on their electricity consumption strategies within the general framework of discrete choice modeling that was mainly developed for individuals, but is increasingly also used for firms. Thank you, and I'm very happy to take on any question or comment.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, for the very interesting presentation and for the great work. So we will have exactly 10 minutes for questions and answers. I have questions myself, but maybe we can leave the floor first for the participants. If anyone wants to ask questions, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can write in the chat if you want.
Please raise your hand also if you want, so
yes.
I can see who wants to speak.
So maybe they will ask a question afterwards, but I already have questions, so maybe I can start. So thank you very much, Alessandra. I find the work very relevant and very interesting. And I have a more, let's say, start with a more general inquiry on something that you've mentioned early in the slides, which is the different types of evaluation that we do, which one of them is yours, the survey type of evaluation, compared to value of lost load or other evaluation types. And I'm wondering, because indeed, we usually, me included, we usually use these kind of value of lost load estimates to incorporate in different types of mathematical models. For example, for planning or operating systems, etc. And I was wondering, what's your opinion about how can we translate information that some of the information that you show us in your work into the type of mathematical and quantitative models that we use for investigating different operating and planning decisions?
Thanks for this interesting question. So indeed, my perception is that for when we look at business consumers, with business I mean also manufacturers, just companies consuming electricity, of course. The role is the most widely used method, and I think it makes sense to use this approach because yeah, for when we talk about economic activities, the contribution to GDP is probably the like most important things in terms of planning. While this is not necessarily true for households, no, the perceptions are very much different. So I think this kind of information is a bit more difficult to incorporate directly in, like also in the evaluation of the in cost-benefit analysis, because it's not so easy to translate in euros or dollars per kilowatt hour. However, I think it can complement this kind of the information that is provided by the VOL, because it gives an idea of which is the value of providing advance notice. So, for example, or what is the impact of different durations. So, and also, for example, it gives some information of blackout timing, which is not always easy to reconstruct with the VOL, because we don't have detailed information on the consumption profiles of all activities. So although I like very much to investigate the details of consumer preferences, I think the VOL will probably remain as the most important method, but we can also complement this information and add something to the picture.
It's very interesting. I totally agree, specifically on the point of the timing, because even if the VOL can capture numerically the economic implication, like on the production, it cannot capture the impact if we want to consider a specific time of a blackout or something.
Yeah.
Like this. So indeed, like I agree with you. And I'm actually curious. I think there might be interest in trying to fit or try to find a way to translate, for example, results of your work into more quantitative aspects that can, like you said, not replace the VOL, but enrich it with more information that is not just a simple average assumption about something like that. And I agree with you specifically when you talk about residential users who now become more and more active members of the whole production cycle, not even just the consumption. And therefore, I would guess that in some years we will also have some interest to evaluate the economic, or some mean to evaluate this economic impact on residential users. I'm talking, of course, on the economies that will put in a system of prosumer, like being both a consumer and a producer. Absolutely. So I don't know if someone have a question.
I do have a question, if I may. First, thank you for the presentation. It was very nice indeed. I was wondering, you explained that the users who already had experienced the blackouts had a different valuation of the financial compensation option. Do you think that the probability of occurrence of a blackout would be a relevant criteria to take into account? Because I guess if that happens very often, people won't have the same perception at all of blackouts.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you say. Actually, it was so we started this analysis because like the general perception is in Switzerland that there is no blackout, but of course this is not true. Just people trust very much their suppliers, and blackouts don't happen so often. But in the previous 6 months, different cities of Ticino experienced some relatively long and unannounced blackouts, which was a bit surprising for all of us. So we thought it was a good moment to see if also the recent experience of a blackout could change individual behavior. And yeah, I think that for sure people would answer differently if blackouts should start to occur more often, or if they should be very long. And yeah.
Great, thank you. So just one last question, Alessandra. So it's more more specific about so one of the things when I read your paper I found quite interesting was, and I want maybe to understand a bit more. So you said that the respondents who have a backup connection, they are less affected or they at least they reveal that they're less affected by the duration of a blackout compared to others. But I was wondering, like those who have a backup connection. So what is the assumption here? So the backup connection is connected to a privately owned generator or something like this, or?
No, so we asked whether they had a UPS. I think it's called like that in, yeah, like the continuity, the sort of big battery, or a generator, or they could have all of the three, or an additional connection to a different portion of the distribution grid. And this last option was indeed mainly used among banks or insurances that they have this very expensive server, and data must be kept very well. So they are not enough in the sample to go a bit deeper into the details, no? But I think they are super protected against blackouts, and so the impact of duration is a bit different. So if they're hit, but then but otherwise the blackout for the others can last even one day, but they are protected. So yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Alessandra. Great presentation.
Thank
you. We can maybe move to our next presenter. Excited to have Mr. Mekobe Ajebe. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. My apologies in advance. Mr. Mekobe is from Weatherhead School of Management, and he's going to present to us a paper on transforming energy crisis in the Gulf of Guinea, a positive, innovative disruption. The floor is yours, Mr. Mekobe.
Thank you. My name is Mekobe Ajebe, first year doctoral student in Weatherhead School of Management. I am here to talk about a case study on the Gulf of Guinea, the transforming energy crisis in the Gulf of Guinea, a positive, innovative disruption. The Gulf of Guinea is a sub-region located in the central West African coastline around this area. Sources reveal that it holds about 35% of the world's total petroleum reserves and about 20% of the total rainforest. So actually, we see that despite the abundance of these reserves, about 90 million people in this region lack access to electricity, as revealed on the chart that you can see. So you find the countries here: Cameroon, Nigeria, South Tome and Principe, Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon, Republic of Congo, and Equatorial Guinea. About 19 million people lack access, despite the abundance in petroleum reserves. So in saying that, I went into investigating what was the cause, why some of the reasons why they don't have power, they don't have access to power. So some of the reasons that I noticed were that because of the geographical diversity of the region, there's a variety of different administrative, bureaucratic, and linguistic traditions, resulting in the coexistence of a Francophone, an Anglophone, and a Spanish system with overlapping and competing mandates. So basically, all these countries have different administrative and linguistic backgrounds, and even though they're found in the region where it's very rich, they are unable to come together to help provide access to their populations. So their national priorities are different, and because of this multiplicity of schemes and overlapping mandates, they have different power poles. Power poles in most of these countries in the Gulf are like a national authority that controls the system of energy access, like electricity. So like in Cameroon, for instance, you have the CAP, which stands for Central African Power Pool. In Nigeria, which is a neighbor to Cameroon, you have the West African Power Pool. In Sao Tome, you have the same with Cameroon. Angola has two, Central African Power Pool and South African Power Pool. And in addition to that, in addition to this confusion that they have here, they have different major electricity companies operating in all these countries, which are like the major ones, that is being approved by each of the countries. Then they also belong to different sub-regional blocks, which makes it difficult for them to come together and really provide access to these people. So, in seeing all of these, you can see the differences on the level of access, how uneven it is with the different countries. So on the chart on the right, and then so I came to the question, so like what role can national governments within the Gulf of Guinea states play to form an ecosystem that is innovative? So it brought me to the studies of, I was then motivated to introduce the innovative ecosystem of orchestra model with its competition as a win-win for all stakeholders in the Gulf of Guinea. The investors, energy investors, the local consumers, and the local governments. So I am proposing that, say, if it's a good fit that can reach out to the highest number of people to provide them with access to electricity. So this chart here shows the variations in the different countries. In Cameroon, they have slightly above 60% of the people who have access to electricity. I mean, like about 39% or 38% have no access. If we say access, they have no access to electricity. It's not like blackout or anything, they don't have. So Nigeria has just about 60%, almost like Cameroon. Sao Tome has 70%. Angola, which is a bigger country than some of these, Sao Tome and Cameroon combined, has about 45%. Democratic Republic of Congo, which is one of the biggest with very large forest cover, have less than 10% of access to electricity and so on. So it's a huge problem. So the design I carried out a study in localities, communities in these countries, from 8 countries and 13 communities. So I noticed that 71% as a median are opposed, are in favor, to 21% who are opposed to that countries should take other countries' interests into account instead of focusing on individual interest. Because if they work in a group to provide access to all the countries in the Gulf, it's going to be better. So 71% are in favor of that, and 21% were not. They like the current system that they're operating. So so the process is orchestrated by the Gulf of Guinea's Commission, which act as a if they have to implement the process, it's there's a commission that's already existing in the Gulf that embodies all these countries. So that if they have to use the model that I'm trying to propose, it's the Gulf, the commission can act as the commission acting as the main body and provide market opportunity grounded on a very clear innovative architecture or platform that will attract a group of energy companies working together, not maintaining the same policies that each country has to follow its own. But if the Commission can help all these countries come together, act as the main body, and then open the markets to other energy companies within the region and outside, to provide them with the access, then that's going to help. So in this ecosystem, the Commission can be the dominating firm, while other firms, national firms, private firms are invited to the just as I stated. Then there are some benefits that they're going to get in conclusion to that. If they come together, it's going to form a resource asymmetry between the Gulf of Guinea countries and other benefits like cooperative agreements among the countries and competitors, and will enable them to internalize a partnering rival skill, will promote collaboration that will reduce cost of risk and uncertainties associated with innovation and new products development among the different companies operating in the Gulf, and it will as well promote product innovation, technological advancement, and national adaptation in the different countries. So all of that will strengthen the system and provide strategic flexibility among these countries, and it will go a long way to help provide access to the remainder part of the people who don't have access. So some of the safeguards that I noticed that most investors are reluctant to come to these regions because of different kind of uncertainties. I looked at some safeguards that can help investors to go into the region, which are mainly promoted by the World Bank and the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, which protects investments such as this, energy investors from contractual payment obligations, should in case the local governments or the commissions do not pay, obstructions of an arbitrary process, expropriation and naturalization, foreign currency availability and convertibility. These banks step in to help facilitate some of these losses so that any investors that is going into some of these countries should not really worry much about the investment, but to go there and see how they can help to provide access to many people. So thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to receive open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mekobe, for your presentation. It's such an important topic, energy access in Africa. I think it's on one of the most important topics today being discussed around the globe, and thank you for putting this in context and for presenting your work. So I'll first leave the floor to anyone who wants to raise a question.
I would like to ask a question.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Really, it was very interesting. I just want to know how do you evaluate international programs that usually have devoted resources for electricity access and energy access in Africa? Usually these programs are financed by multilateral organizations like the World Bank or ITB or other multilateral organizations. So do you think those organizations have a role here, or they had an important impact in the electrification of some of the countries, or perhaps these are more like pilots or small projects that are not large enough to have a larger impact?
Mekobe, you're muted. Maybe you can unmute your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I didn't get I think there are so many questions in there. So can you be precise on the exact question so that I provide an answer?
Sorry, yes. Just to ask, what do you think about the efforts of the multilateral organizations in reducing or incrementing electricity access in these countries?
So at the concluding part of my presentation, I talked of the role of the World Bank and the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development in providing safeguards to investors and other multilateral companies that want to come to some of these regions to invest, and how they can protect, be like an intermediary between the local governments and these companies to protect their investment. But that's a very important question with the current context of what is there. Even with the safeguards, I don't know how they will be able to penetrate the markets, because most of these countries operate with a kind of monopoly systems that is providing energy access. So that's the main reason why I am introducing this innovative system that can help to facilitate, that will make the markets more open, but still using the safeguards that are in place, placed by the international community.
Any questions from the attendees? So I have a question. I have a couple of questions actually, Mekobe, if you allow me. So the first thing is just out of curiosity. One of the numbers you've showed me, like made me a bit curious about the 21% of people who oppose basically. As it seems in the statement, is that they oppose some collaborative efforts to improve the functioning operational investments in the region. So I was wondering, do you have any more detailed idea about why particularly they refuse that? Like, what are their points of rejection?
So when I talk to people, I try to talk with a wide variety of consumers. People work with the local government, who we call them in Africa bayam-selams, who people work in the markets, people work in, farmers who stay in very remote areas. And we talk to these people, they have a wide variety of different ways of looking at things. Most often you talk to people in the government, they don't want to reveal information, they want to just send out a positive image about the countries, and all what they'll tell you, we are fine, and the companies we are using are doing great. Of course, that's a very small number, a very small percentage. The majority of the people you talk to in that small number will tell you that everything is moving on well. And the majority of the people who are not fortunate to be in that small number are people who are outside the government, and they are the people in the masses really seeing the crisis. So they'll tell you that if another country, a neighboring country, has a better system and has good investors, why not? We should bring them instead of limiting them to just one national supplier. So that's what is causing that.
That's very interesting. So if I understand correctly, so those are people like this percentage represents more or less people who are somewhat in denial, or like they don't see the real size of the problem and the real potential of improving the situation. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So I have another question, and maybe if someone wants to ask a question, please don't hesitate to raise your hands. But meanwhile, I can ask another question about. Also, like I'm kind of curious about the scope of your study. So why particularly the Gulf of Guinea?
Originally, I'm from Cameroon, and the Gulf of Guinea is considered one of the few regions which is very rich in terms of natural resources, and has a very big forest cover too around it. So it's of interest to me because only the potential of the Gulf is enough to power the whole of sub-Saharan Africa.
And there are already, so my question maybe is more like, are there already mechanisms that exist that kind of group the Gulf countries together, the countries of Gulf of Guinea?
Yes, there's a commission, but there's not. They don't talk anything about this.
Okay.
So, yeah, you go to the website. It's just the commission.
Mm.
They don't. It's been there forever, and they maintain their mandates. They just go there, but they maintain the same problem that I identified with each of them keeping their national priorities and belonging in so many regional blocks makes them unable to come together to see what they can do to help the people in that region and maybe beyond the region. So.
Okay, so one more question, maybe last question from my side. So I find it interesting, of course, that the very interesting idea that you're proposing here. And I'm wondering, have you done some or intending to do some qualitative or quantitative evaluation of the needs for investments? Like, to be more specific, what is the needs for investments and how? So maybe some idea about how much investment can improve how much percent the situation in the Gulf of Guinea. Did you do such an evaluation, or do you intend to do it?
I intend to do it. So
okay.
It's just I'm a first year student.
Yeah, but I'm just asking because it would be interesting, and I think you agree with me about the idea of seeing like how much the investment is needed and subsequently how much it can improve the situation, particularly in terms of reliability of supply, of course. Thank you very much. I'm done with my question. I don't know if,
excuse me, Adam, we're ahead of time and Alessandra has a question, so
yes,
please
sure.
go on.
Sure.
Thank you for this interesting presentation. I was just maybe you already said it, but I didn't get it. What kind of cooperation do you have in mind? Is like sharing of best practices or reaching some more uniform legislation? Because I was thinking, because you said that there is national monopolists, let's say, so it's not that we are talking about competitive markets where someone can come and get a market share. So I was curious, how could this work in practice?
So there's no cooperation when it comes to energy. I say that because each country has its own system that they are following in the Gulf. They have, each of them have their own national markets, and looking at them, each of them has a power pool that's different from the other. Some share, but even among the power pools, each government contracts with a national company. We call them parastatals in that area of the world. When they contract with them, only they can have the power to supply electricity, and it's not found in any other country in the Gulf. So what I'm suggesting is they should have a more open market where they can allow competitors to come in and then discuss. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, thank you very much, Mekobe.
Thank you.
So if there's no more questions, then maybe I suggest that we move on to the next presenter. So the next presentation is going to be by Javier Bustos-Salvagno. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, from Universidad del Desarrollo. So Javier is going to give us a presentation on reasons for electricity outages in Chile and regulatory implications. The floor is yours, Javier. You have 20 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure here to be presenting this work that I have been doing in Chile. I'm a professor in Universidad del Desarrollo, but I'm also a researcher from the Solar Energy Research Center here in Chile. And this research has been funded by this institution. What I am trying to do in this research is asking about electricity interruption outages in Chile. And basically because we know that in the world and also in the developing world, there is a process of electrification. Right now, we know that in the energy consumption mix, electricity is only 20%. But if we want to reduce the amount of emissions, part of the solution would be to replace some fossil fuel consumption with electricity that has been produced by renewables. And several developing countries, like in the case of Chile, renewables is a very competitive option to produce energy. And this is why I think this is a very relevant question to ask about the quality of the electricity service and the relationship that, of course, would have with other energy policy objectives like decarbonization. But I'm going to focus here only on the electricity interruption side. And for that, the discussion in Chile in the recent years and also in middle income countries has been focused more on the quality of services regarding than the access, like the case that Mekobe was showing before. Chile has an access of 99%, almost 95% in rural areas. So access is no longer a problem, perhaps for Chile, but the quality of supply it is. You can see in the graphic in the figure that I'm showing here that around decided in the number of hours with interruption, the average number of hours with interruptions in Chile has been very stable with some changes depending on some climatic events, very important storms, snowstorms in some areas, or perhaps some other impacts from climatic factors. But it's around 15 hours, 18 hours, 12 hours average in the country. When you compare that with the rest of Latin American countries, is above the average in the case of in a better quality index. So it's pretty well for the Latin American region. But if you compare with other developed countries, it's pretty bad. Usually in Chile, we say that we measure the number of hours interruptions in terms of hours, and in developed countries measure in terms of minutes. So one of the goals of the energy policy in Chile in 2050 is to reach the same average as developing countries, around 1 hour of interruptions in electricity, and by 2035, 4 hours. Of course, this is an energy policy goal. There is no a particular assessment of if this is optimal for the level of development of the country, but it's good to know which are the factors, which are the variables that impact the quality of supply of electricity in Chile if we want to reduce this amount, if you want to converge to the levels that we see in developing countries, in more developed countries. When we look at the related literature, there is plenty of literature on electricity interruptions in general. Basically, when we have to classify the factors that finally lead to a blackout, to an interruption, it could be inheriting factors or inherent factors. The first ones are related with the path dependence of the network. Basically, if you have long lines, larger probability for interruptions. Also, if you have underground lines, you are better protected from climatic variables, so it's much better the quality of service. But also, there are the second group of factors that are more related with the density of the population, of the customers, the topographic variables, the climatic variables. So these are usually the kind of factors that you have to analyze when you try to analyze the number and the intensity of the electricity interruptions. Particularly when we are talking about weather factors, wind is one of the main ones, but also when they are combined with different kinds of precipitations. It could be rains, it could be snow, but also they lead to several interruptions. Also, there is another side of the literature that is more focused on the regulation and how the regulation of distribution incentivize or not quality of service. This is particularly interesting for the case of Chile, because Chile in 1982, they started the liberalization of the electricity sector, the privatization of it. And now is full private. There is no public companies in the distribution sector, neither in generation or transmission. But also for regulation of the distribution sector, it was designed a framework of an efficient firm that is considered for the tariffication process. It's very similar to price cap, but it was designed a couple of years before price cap. So, but the idea is basically that ex ante the tariffication period, the regulator design an efficient firm that only takes into consideration the demand of the real firm and design the most efficient firm to provide this demand, to supply this demand. So basically the idea is to give the incentive to the real firm to be as efficient as possible. Well, the literature in the developed world have shown that rate of return regulation has several problems, but one good quality is that it's in general it shows more incentive to investment in quality services. And the opposite comes from, for example, price cap or efficient firm regulation, where stricter forms of this price regulation can lead to a degradation in quality. So I'm going to try here also to introduce some of these variables in my framework to show if there is any effect of the regulation that on the electricity interruptions. For the data, I'm going to use basically the system average interruption duration index, the SAIDI. We have monthly data from 2012 to 2018. Basically, the standard here is that in SAIDI, all the interruptions that are longer than 3 minutes are included here. And this is an index that is calculated for each commune in Chile. And for the data analysis, we are going to separate the 3 reasons that the regulator classified interruptions. It could be for internal reasons. This is a failure in the distribution system. It could be for external reasons. This is a failure that comes from the generation or transmission sector. And it could be also for due to force majeure. In these 3 categories are interruptions classified. We have in Chile more than 300 communes, but we are going to use only data from almost 200 because we're going to use only communes that have one distributor. Why? Well, this is a problem of the data. From 2012 to 2018, we only have one SAIDI for each commune. We cannot separate the SAIDI when there are 2 distribution companies in the same commune. So that's the reason why we only kept the communes that have one distributor. And we're going to characterize with variables of this commune, for example, how rural it is, the income level, the density of the commune, to control factors like these inheritance factors that we mentioned before that can predict the amount of interruptions. Also, we're going to take into consideration weather condition, weather variables that are obtained from open weather map, and we're going to show here the the descriptive statistics of the variables, just to mention that there is a lot of variability, heterogeneity between different communes. In average per month, there are 2 hours of interruptions in average, but you can have a month that have in some cases have 260 hours of interruptions. So it's almost a third of the time in a month without electricity. But these are usually very rural communes, very far away communes in the country. Also, we're going to have very small distribution companies that supply, for example, that only have a small amount of this is 0.2% of the clients in the country, and some other larger distribution companies that have almost 40% of the distribution clients. So we have a lot of heterogeneity also in distribution, also between income and of course in how urban or rural is the commune. And also we're going to use some weather variables. The speed of wind, we're going to have a dummy variable, for example, for communes that have experienced wind speed above 40 kilometers per hour or 50 kilometers per hour. Also, a couple of variables of rain and snow, considering, for example, the number of days in a month where the amount of rain was higher than the historical average in 1 hour, plus a standard deviation. We also, in the sensibility, we use +1 standard deviation, +2 standard deviation, and 3, but results don't change. Also, we introduce a variable that is the number of days in a month where the amount of rain was higher than the historical average in the month. And the methods that we're going to use is an econometric estimation using as dependent variable the SID indicator, the number of hours of interruptions, considering as explanatory variables the income level, the rural amount of population, the size of the distribution company, and also we're going to introduce some regulatory variables. For example, if to calculate the efficient firm for the tariffication process, if the real firm was considered or not to set up these tariffs. I'm going to explain in a little bit more why this is important. Following the Hausman test, we're going to do this estimation with fixed effects by commune. The basic model here is just without considering the weather variables, just a dummy for the winter months that of course are more related with weather factors. And what is interesting is that income level is not relevant to explain the SID that is due to distribution failures, but it is relevant for example, for force majeure. And this is important for that perhaps, and also it is relevant for interruptions in the transmission and generation sector. This is relevant because what could be happening is that when there is a failure in the transmission sector, it's usually a large failure. It's not like a very small interruption like in distribution. When a 220 kilovolts line fails, it's usually a large interruption, and perhaps what could happen could happen here is that these failures of transmission lines impact more in lower income communes than in larger income communes. This could be perhaps communes that depend on one line, and without the supply of that line, they really get a large interruption. So this could be one of the explanation of this. Also an interesting result is that the larger distribution companies handle better the force majeure interruptions. And perhaps this is interesting because smaller distribution companies, perhaps they don't have the operational or the investments that are needed to face larger, for example, weather events. But what is interesting is that it is not significant for failures in the distribution segment. So the size of the distribution companies is not that important there. When we include the weather conditions, just to have a better specification of the model, we see that the weather is really important for internal side, for the interruptions that occur due to failures in the distribution sector. And there you can see that wind, rain, snow are all relevant and statistically significant. And the only thing interesting here perhaps to mention is that the cumulative amount of rain and snow is more important than the precipitations by hour. So the cumulative effect, it's more important to produce an interruption that is included inside it. And finally, if we include regulatory impacts or regulatory variables that are relevant, what we have done here is the following. In Chile, we have this efficient firm regulation that, according to the inefficient firm, the regulator sets the tariffs. To calculate this efficient firm, of course, the regulator have to choose between all the distribution companies, or around 30 distribution companies in the country, but has to choose only a few of them to use as a reference firm. This reference firm will be the one that will be considered for the tarification process. So it is interesting to know if being a reference firm has an effect on the quality of supply or not. And what we found is that it has a significant effect, and the reference firm has a better quality of supply, has a lower level of interruptions. So what it seems to show these results is that it could be interesting to use the real data of the firm, the real data of the reference firm, to calculate tariff, and perhaps that gives an incentive for the firm to invest in better quality of service, in line what was found in the literature that I mentioned at the beginning, where price cap or some efficient firm regulation sometimes could lead to a degradation of the quality of supply due to lower incentive to invest in quality of supply. Here, perhaps
you have 2 minutes left, Javier.
Perfect. Perhaps there is an effect, an interesting effect here that could be taken into account in the regulation. So just to summarize, weather factors as well as regulatory variables or the regulatory design have a relevant effect of the quality of supply in the case of outage hours in Chile. Force majeure interruptions are better handled by larger distribution companies. Income level seems that it's not relevant to explain outages at the distribution sector, but perhaps there is an interesting effect to look at the transmission generation sector. And what I just mentioned about the regulatory variables, that could be because of this effect of a regulatory incentive, but also there is another explanation that perhaps referential firms are chosen by the regulator because these are firms that have better quality of information and are better as a referential firm. So it is interesting to know if including more number of referential firms, now the regulator is usually it's including only 6 referential firms, perhaps doubling it to 12 could have a relevant effect on the quality of supply. Future research, basically, we want to expand the database to include more communes and perhaps more communes with more than one distributor, and compare, for example, between small size distributors with larger size distributors, and also different form of distributors. Private firm with cooperatives, for example, could be also an interesting question to research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Javier. It's a comprehensive analysis, it's a great presentation, and it's always a pleasure to see work done on the Chilean power system, which is a reference, a textbook case for anyone studying electricity regulation, because it was one of the first countries that had liberalized their electricity sector. So I remember studying a lot about the Chilean power system when I was studying electricity power sector. It's very interesting, the analysis you've done. So maybe I will first ask if the participants have any questions. They can raise their hands virtually, or they can open their mics. Maybe I can start by a couple of questions that I have myself. So I was wondering first about, so it's a very interesting analysis, and it's quite a comprehensive view about the factors that might be impacting this, and I think as well that you have done a great job at selecting the scope and the parameters of your study. Particularly, I'm wondering about the weather conditions. So I am not very familiar with the weather nature in Chile, but can you explain to me a bit the choice for? So of course I understand the choice of wind, because it really impacts usually the lines everywhere. So if you have like high winds, it might cut some lines, etc. Rain as well, it might produce some impact with electricity lines, etc. But for example, heat waves, which we have seen at least in some countries in Europe and some countries in the US, are really weather factors that weather factors that can really impact power delivery, and even cold spills, which happened in Texas this last winter. So, can you give me your opinion about heat waves and cold spills? Are they relevant at all in the Chilean power system?
Thank you. Yes, it's a very interesting question. In the case of Chile, historically, it hasn't been really factors that usually explain interruptions, but one of the larger discussions in the country about quality of supply started with a large snowstorm in the capital city in 2017. So that's the reason why we introduced snow, because usually it wasn't also a large factor in the history of the data, but due to climate change, we have seen that it has become more relevant. Temperature, it is interesting. Heat waves in the north part of the country sometimes are, well, in the north part of the country, we have the desert of Atacama. It's one of the driest parts of the world. And basically the lines there are designed to support 35 Celsius degree. But also due to climate change, that is changing. So it is relevant perhaps when we look at newer data, but in the past we haven't seen heat waves, and cold. Yeah, cold for sure hasn't been an issue, but heat waves perhaps it could be something that we should be looking at in the recent data.
Oh, that's great. So I like the observation, because like I think it makes sense that now it's more like we can maybe observe more and more heat wave impact on transmission lines, and 35 degrees, whereas it's not really bad, but it's not very high neither. So 35 is actually, I think you can easy now. Here in Paris, we have summers now where we have 42 and 43 degrees some days. So I think it's becoming a bit more interesting. But I like that like when you're explaining it, is that yes, historical data do not explain it. So maybe you have already observed that it's not explained by historical data, but maybe it will impact something in the future. So if someone have a question, please don't hesitate to raise your hands. I have other questions, so maybe I can proceed with another one. One of the factors that I would have expected to see, and maybe it is included in your study, but I missed it somehow. It's the impact of aging infrastructure. So how long the investment in this infrastructure has been made. So I could have expected something related to, for example, these the networks or these systems are older than others, or they have been operated longer. Did you include this aspect in your study somehow, or do you think it's irrelevant or relevant? Like, maybe you can give your opinion about it.
Well, basically, you have a really good point. That was a problem with the data we have. Since we couldn't have the data of how old the infrastructure was, or we were trying to control it with different variables, dummy variables for distribution companies in different communes. Of course, we have to set aside the fixed effect, but we want to know if there is a factor between distribution companies. Of course, it's mixed. We don't have an answer for that question, since really the regulator doesn't have also that information. Since this is a problem also for the tarification process, since you use an efficient firm that is not based on the real firm, the regulator doesn't have any information about the real firm. That's private information for the firm. So that's an issue that is changing, of course, because now the regulation wants it's improving in the way that the regulator will have more power and more knowledge of what is happening in the network. But historical data on how old this infrastructure is, it's very limited.
I see. But you've tried to control it via dummy variables, and I think it probably, I mean, it probably will explain a lot of the impact of SIDI, but maybe I agree in a bit that it's not very interesting because the impact is clear. I mean, we don't need probably to study it. Like, we know aging infrastructure will probably have a much more impact. So maybe it's not very important to, especially if the data are not there.
There is a factor that is usually something that by design, the design of the network is, for example, one of the larger causes of interruptions in highly urbanized areas are car accidents, car accident to the poles, and that's something that still happens. But that's a problem of the design of the line. The lines and the network was designed too close to roads. But that's something that we cannot account really, besides controlling for the density of the area.
Yeah, it's very rare events, I can imagine, or it would not have statistical significance even though it exists and it has an impact. So maybe one last question. We have 2 minutes left. I was wondering if you can explain to me a bit. So I understand that as a concept, and maybe you even mentioned it, but maybe I just couldn't understand it fully. About what is the mechanism through which you think those referential firms are able to outperform the ones who are not referential? So what kind of, like, in your analysis, what is the preference treatment that they're getting that might explain them performing better?
Well, I think, well, this was considered also in a recent regulatory change that has been done in Chile 2 years ago, in 2019. So increase the number of referential firms, because what happened in Chile is that you have 30 distribution companies. The regulator choose only 6 according to different density levels, because density usually explains the average cost of the firm. And then make 6 groups, the 6 areas of firms. And the tariff that are set for the group in number 6, for example, was set up considering the referential firm of that group. So what happened usually is that there was a large difference between the real average cost of a firm that was in that group but was not a referential one, and the final tariff. So I think that this, if you are the referential firm, at least you know that your demand and your conditions are going to be considered when when the regulator set up tariffs. So at least you have a lower level of uncertainty in terms of the investment you have to do. But also, it is also important that usually the regulator choose companies where they have better information, where their information is more reliable. So there is also perhaps an effect there. Well, it's not that they have better quality of service because of their referential firm. They are chosen by the regulator as referential firm because they have better quality of service. So that's something that is different to disentangle from this.
Well, thank you very much. We have a question I see here from Lawrence. Maybe Lawrence, if you want to unmute and ask the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, thank you, Javier, for the interesting presentation. So I was just wondering if you have considered checking if the independent variables, log communal, commune, and the percent urban population may actually be related to one another. And then the second one is that as regards to income and the SIDE, could it be that income is actually dependent on the SIDE and not the other way around? So just, just some things I thought of from the model. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you for the question. It's very interesting. We checked the correlation, the cross correlation between the variables, and that's the reason why we kept these only ones. We also check with other variables considering not urban population, but the urban density of clients, because sometimes there are differences between the communes area and the area where the distribution have clients. But we kept those ones because they have a better correlation for the estimation. And also you have to consider that in Chile, not all the rural areas are poor. You have lower density areas or rural areas that are very rich because they are very close to the coast. They are like where areas where the people go for vacation, and that's a higher income commune. So it's not, and usually not always they have better quality of supply. So that's at least the reason why we use this specification, that SIDE it's perhaps could be explained more by the level of development in the of the commune more than the level of SIDE could explain the development of the commune.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much again, Javier, for the very interesting presentation. It was a pleasure to listen to it. So I suggest that we move on to our last presentation for this session. So we have a presentation from, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Jhon Perez. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, but Jhon is from University La Salle, Department of Electrical Engineering, and he's going to give us a presentation on nexus between water, energy poverty, and food safety in urban areas of a developing country, and he's going to take the case study of Colombia. Have a pleasure to have you here, Jhon, and please, you have the floor. We can't hear you. I don't know if you're talking. Maybe you can unmute your microphone. Maybe I don't know if he can hear us. Pierre, are you able to get in contact with him?
Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay, very good.
Well, I'm so happy to participate of the IAEE Energy, COVID, and Climate Change International Conference. This board was prepared by Professor Guillermo Diaz at La Salle University in Bogotá, DC, and me, Jhon Perez, at La Salle University. This work is entitled Nexus between Water, Energy Poverty, and Food Safety in Urban Areas of a Developing Country, Colombian case. Well, this area is focused on sustainable development goals. This is the mainly motivation put forth by the United Nations. Several challenges by humankind to the year 2030. These challenges are no poverty, zero hunger, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, and climate action, among others. And after of economic world economic meeting of World Bank, the author have developed the analysis of WEF Nexus, known is like water, energy, and food knowledge. This paper attempts to establish relationship between water, focus on sanitation and potable water, energy in modern and traditional cooking foods, and food based on food scarcity. The results are based on the quality of life national survey. These data are collected by the National Administrative Department of Statistics, known in Colombia as DANE. Well, a brief literature review presents the developed the author Hoff in 2011. This analysis looking for complex relationship between water, energy, and food. And recently, literature studied another nodes, for example, water and energy, water and food, energy and food, and more recently was study another topics as water, energy, food, and climate change. This objective is the minimize the consumption of water and energy in urban areas. Recently, with the or currently with the COVID-19 brought outage or another difficulties in developing countries. For example, the use of water and energy in the urban food system in low GDP countries are related to processing and distribution, preparation and cooking, and the COVID brought disruptive consequences, mainly in low and middle income countries, in different aspects like sanitation, drinking water, affordable and clean energy, and food sufficiency. These factors show the cross-linking between COVID-19 and the WEF Nexus. The focus in the modes of the study are based into three categories: internal relationship analysis, external impact analysis, and evaluation of complex system. This work is based on internal relation analysis and external impact analysis. Well, this is our proposal methodology. in the external area, we have the ODS objectives, and the internal area, we have the WEF Nexus related to water, for example, potable water and sanitation, related to energy poverty, cooking pools, and electric access, and related to food security, food scarcity. In the center, we have income per household. That is the important aspect related with the Nexus. Sorry. Okay. Well, now I am talking about a little about of Colombia. Colombia is located in the north of South America. The country covers an area of 1,418,748 square kilometers, and the population is over more 50 million inhabitants. The population is a mix between native indigenous, European settlement, especially of Spain, and forced African in the 18th century, and also immigration from the Middle East at the end of the 19th century. Colombia is a rich country in natural resources such as oil, minerals, metal, precious stone, fruits, and several agricultural products. Colombia is divided into 4 mainly cities, big cities. Bogotá is a developing large cities, approximately over 8 million inhabitants. However, we have a Gini coefficient presents a high level of inequality. Even with South American countries, is with relation with the year 2019. The percentage of urban population has increased every year. In the 2018 is approximately more than 80%. This is another data related to energy and socioeconomic indicators in Colombia. The GDP has increased every year. However, with the pandemic broke, and also the GDP per capita. We have in urban population a high percentage of electrification, and we have a serious problem with the data related to marginal population or slum neighborhoods. The data no is complete. We're related to the 2017 year. Well, this study is based on data taken from the DANE, the service related to quality life of Colombia. The samples is correspond to 2010 and 2017. The samples are very similar. We can observe the two samples, and it's very similar the sample, and the the database in this average also are very similar in the variables. This situation made it possible this work. The data correspond to potable water, sanitation, energy poverty, correspond to type of fuel used for cooking, and related to food safety, related to food scarcity in the food, in a period of 1 month. Another parameters correspond to income per household, expressed in constant dollar of 2018. The author of this work adjusted the dollars to in constant terms to 2018. Well, this is the results. And related to water, the advance in potable water are good. However, but noise and out. In 2010, 89% to 93%. This is a reduction in the sentences with potable water. With respect to sanitation, the results are not good. Between 2010 to 2017, the reduction of difficulties in sanitation in the structure on the neighborhoods only was reduced in 1%. It's not enough for the development in some areas. Well, in energy poverty, the case is a little different. For example, related to modern fuels like electricity and natural gas in 2010 correspond to 55%, and in 2017 correspond to 65%. This means a reduction of 10%. With respect to transitional fuels like LPG in 2010 correspond to 40%, and in 2017 correspond to 32%. These results correspond to reduction of 8%. And dirty fuels like mineral coal, firewood, and was in 2010 correspond to 5%, and in 2017 correspond to 3%. In general, there are better structure in the modern fuels in urban areas. Remember that this study corresponds to urban areas. Well, this figure is very interesting. We can observe 4 quadrants. Every quadrant corresponds to different social status of Colombia. Colombia is divided into 6 social status. They are grouped the status based on, for example, status 1 and status 2 correspond to low status. The characteristics are very similar. and the status 3 and 4 correspond to middle status, and status 5 and 6 correspond a high status. The majority of population is located in low status. After or currently, this percentage can increase due to the economical crisis. And we had the several difference related to the double EF nexus. For example, in high status represents approximately 4.5% of population. The sanitation and potable water is complete. The use of modern cooking foods is very high, and the food scarcity is low. In the middle status, the data shows the sanitation, potable water, food scarcity are so good as there are some difficulties with the use to the modern cooking fuels, and the result are good. However, in low status, we have difficulties in urban areas, mainly in sanitation and modern cooking fuels, and also in food scarcity. This population corresponds to 70% of total of the country. This is sector of the society is very interesting for the study, because there aren't statistics, and the service not recognize this population, and the official entities are not recognized. The sample is very small. However, we have serious problems related to the double EF noted. With respect to sanitation, potable water, and the other case is, for example, with modern cooking and food scarcity. Finally, the literature represents the nexus between water, energy, and food is relatively recent. To understand these relationships, allow to establish best programs for compliance of SDGs in developing countries. This course provides a first step in relationship the nexus and urban areas of a developing country applied to urban areas. This analysis also allow to determine and quantify the fraction of the population with restriction in water, in energy, and in food. We are trying to explain this interlinked using unilateral and mutual relation. In the next work, the author, we are looking for another tools more strong in statistical to explain better the data. Well, in slum neighborhoods or in some marginal social classes are not adequately measured in quality of life service. This situation can create an information gap that to study better this data. This is the reference, the literature is in this word, and this is my email and question. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Jhon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, for your interesting work and your clear presentation. So I can first ask the attendees if anyone have a question. Don't hesitate to raise your hand. Meanwhile, maybe I can start. Yes, can you please keep this slide on? So my question is, if you may just explain to me a bit, what does the sample here represent? So this is like, what is the unit HH here for the sample?
You can repeat please the question.
I'm just wondering, what does the sample number here represent? So like this is, what is the unit here? Because I see, for example, a sample of 386 HH for the high status. I just wondering what does this represent?
About the total of population, the sample.
Yes, so represents? This is, yes, so the HH represents what here? Like what is the unit?
Yes, these surveys are developed by the DANE, collected this information. This is based on World Bank methodology. The specific date of the representative statistical is low to 10%. In the data about the method of statistical, this is the information. However, when I explained it, we had a problem with slow neighborhoods or marginal neighborhoods that are not officially recognized by the official entities, and the data are very, very dispersed, very difficult to, also very difficult to obtain.
Okay. Okay. So yes, yes, households. Yes. Okay. So I see. This is why you were not able to take a lot of samples for the slum neighborhoods, because it's not available. So I have another question on this line. I'm a bit surprised for the numbers, specifically for the high status. So I understand the values for sanitation and potable water. They're quite high. It makes sense. But I still, I kind of like, I'm surprised by the food scarcity is a high, like 1.8% is still a high percentage if we look at the high status community. And modern cooking fuels, it's only 86%. So can you please maybe explain to us a bit more why these numbers are such as they are for the high status particularly?
Yeah. With respect to food scarcity, correspond to in the last month, the quantity of food or the lunch, the possibilities. This data can be, I think so, can be, I think so, could be related to healthy or another features different to scarcity. Yes, in the high status. In contrast to the slow or the low status, I believe this is difficult with the lunch, with the food. I believe that this situation with the COVID-19 must be more complicated. Currently, the last survey is very big, correspond to more than 100,000 household, and includes more representative. I would like to study the last survey, correspond to the last year, 2020, and this information is more realistic, more representative about the situation. This is the first words related to understand the urban WEF nets.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So does anyone from the attendees would like to raise a question? So if not, then I thank you very much, everyone, for having attended this session and for your presentations. It was very enriching, very informing, and very comprehensive. Again, I reiterate that this is one of the most important topics, I would say, in the energy sector, and definitely we need more work that does such analysis in different areas like we have seen in this session. Thank you very much again. I hope you enjoy the last day of the conference tomorrow. It was a great pleasure to have you all here in this session.
Thank you very much. And again, just don't forget to upload your slides on the dashboard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you, Adam.